Before we begin, write to us in the comments about which part of the world you're watching from. We love knowing how far our stories reach. The frontier, a place where the land seemed to have no end, where silence weighed heavier than lead. There lived a young rancher named Silas Brennan, alone on the land his father had left him before dying. 8 months had passed since he'd spoken to another soul, since he'd heard any voice but his own or the wind battering the windows. Every sunrise was the same: wake up, work until his hands bled, and fall asleep listening to the echo of his own breathing. He was a man who no longer expected anything until that morning when he heard a noise in his supply shed. His heart raced as he remembered the rumors: bandits roaming 2 territories away, men who killed for less than the price of a horse. He grabbed his rifle, slipped out silently, and moved across the dry earth. The shed door was slightly ajar, swaying in the breeze. From outside he could see a shadow moving among the grain sacks. He raised his weapon, took a deep breath, and took one more step. Then she appeared in the light, taller than most women he'd seen. Skin bronzed by the sun, black hair falling in a thick braid, and a bow slung across her back. Her leather clothing was worn from travel, her movements precise, almost feline. She was a woman alone, stealing calmly, like someone who'd had to do it too many times to survive. Their eyes met. Hers were dark, nearly black, filled with calculation, not fear. She was assessing him, deciding whether to attack, to run, or simply to ignore him. Silas said nothing. He didn't even tighten his finger on the trigger. There was something in her face, something he recognized instantly, a mix of pain and pride that he'd seen reflected in his own mirror every morning. She took a bag of dried meat without asking permission, and just as she was about to leave, he spoke, his voice dry. "Wait." She stopped, turned her face slightly, and looked at him with one eyebrow raised. No fear, no apology. "You don't have to steal it," he said, lowering the rifle. She didn't respond, only watched him. She didn't trust him, but she didn't leave either. "Take what you need," Silas added. "Just don't come back." For a long moment their eyes remained locked. Then, without a word, the woman took 2 more bags, slung them over her shoulder, and walked past him. As she did, he could smell smoke and sage on her skin, close enough to see a thin scar along her jaw. She didn't thank him. She didn't look back. She simply disappeared into the trees. And without knowing why, Silas couldn't stop watching until she was lost among the forest's shadows. 3 days passed, 3 sunrises in which Silas found himself looking toward the woods, waiting, without admitting it, to see that silhouette move among the trees again. He didn't know if he wanted her to return or if the thought terrified him. At the ranch, the silence weighed more heavily than ever. Every noise, a creaking board, a crow's wingbeat, the wind slamming a door, made him spin around, and then one morning he felt it, that tingle at the back of the neck when someone is watching. His hands froze on the fence he was repairing, splinters digging into his skin. He didn't turn around. He didn't want to scare her if it was her. He struck once more with the mallet, twice, 3 times. The sound of the impact echoed in the cold air until he couldn't stand it anymore. He turned around, and there she was, standing at the edge of the forest about 30 paces away, not hiding, not fleeing, simply watching him. The morning sun lit the shine of her black hair, and even from that distance, Silas could feel the intensity of her gaze. She wasn't looking at him like a threat, but like someone trying to solve a mystery. Their eyes met for an instant that felt eternal. The air grew dense, charged with something neither of them fully understood. She tilted her head, and one corner of her lips lifted, almost as if she discovered something amusing. Then she turned and vanished into the trees again. Silas stood motionless, the mallet hanging loose in his hand, his breath quickening. He spent the rest of the day trying to concentrate, but the image of that gaze haunted him like an echo impossible to erase. The next morning when he went out to work, she was there again, sitting on a fallen log just beyond the boundaries of his property, in full daylight, making no attempt to hide, arms crossed with a serenity that was almost defiant. Silas tried to ignore her. He lasted barely 10 minutes before giving up. He dropped his tools and began walking toward her. Each step felt heavier, as if the air were thickening between them. She didn't move, didn't speak a word, only watched him with those eyes that seemed to pierce through everything. He stopped exactly at the invisible edge of his land, the line neither had crossed yet. Up close, he noticed details he'd missed before: the scars on her fingers, the worn leather of her clothes, the tension in her body held like a coiled spring. "Why do you keep coming back?" he asked, his voice rougher than he intended. She looked at him for a long while before answering, her accent slight but clear. "You're not what I expected," Silas frowned. "What did you expect? Violence, cruelty, the things white men usually offer." She stood, and he noticed her height again. They were almost eye to eye. "But you gave me food and let me go. Why?" He swallowed. He didn't have a clear answer. "Seemed like you needed it more than I did." She lowered her gaze, thoughtful. Her features, as harsh as the desert, seemed to soften slightly. "You live alone," she said. He nodded. "I do too." The silence stretched between them, but it wasn't awkward. It was a silence full of things neither knew how to say. Silas took a deep breath. The scent of sage surrounded him again. "My name is Silas," he said finally. She studied him as if deciding whether she could trust that name. "Nakoa," she answered. The sound of her voice hung in the air like a promise. Then she turned and disappeared once more among the trees. That night, for the first time in many months, Silas didn't sleep alone in his mind. On the 4th day, when the sun was directly overhead, Nakoa returned. But this time she didn't stop at the tree line. She crossed the open field past the corral, walked by the shed, and came straight to the porch where Silas was eating a lunch of hard bread and dried meat in silence. The bread stopped halfway to his mouth. His heart pounded so hard it almost took his breath away. She stopped less than a yard away, close enough that she had to tilt her head to meet his eyes. Her voice was firm, direct. "Are you afraid of me?" It wasn't a question, it was a statement. "No," he lied, though his voice betrayed him. Nakoa watched him without blinking. "Yes, you are, but that's all right. Fear keeps men alive." Without asking permission, she sat beside him on the porch step so close their shoulders nearly brushed. The warmth of her body made him shiver. Then with the calm of someone observing an uncomfortable truth, she added, "But that's not why your hands shake when I'm near." Silas's face flushed. He dropped the bread, unable to respond. "I don't know what you're talking about." She turned her face toward him, and for the first time a faint smile appeared on her lips. "Yes, you do," she said softly. "You look at me like a hungry man looks at water after crossing the desert." Silas's breathing grew heavy. He wanted to say something, but no words came. Then Nakoa leaned toward him. Her warm breath brushed his cheek. "I haven't been with a man in 6 months," she whispered. "Since my husband died." Silas swallowed hard, the world spinning around him. "Do you know what it's like to want and not be able to have?" she said, her voice low and rough, laden with something he didn't fully understand. "I don't know," he murmured, barely audible. Nakoa looked at him with a mixture of tenderness and curiosity. "You've never been with a woman, have you?" Silas lowered his gaze. Shame burned inside him. He didn't need to answer. She already knew. Her fingers rose, tracing the line of his jaw with a touch so light it could have been a dream. "That's nothing to be ashamed of," she said calmly. Silas closed his eyes, trying to control the trembling that ran through him. "Then why do I feel this way?" She watched him closely. "Because you think it makes you less, but maybe it makes you more." Before he could ask what she meant, the forest seemed to stir. Nakoa tensed, turning her face to the east. "What is it?" Silas asked, alert. "They're coming," she said quietly, in the tone of someone who had endured too many pursuits. The change was immediate. The woman who seconds ago had been whispering was now a warrior. Her hand went straight to the knife at her belt, muscles taut, eyes scanning the horizon. Silas felt the air charged with danger. In the distance, voices sounded. Nakoa looked at him, her lips pressed together. "They're looking for me," she said coldly. "I've been gone too long." Before he could say a word, 3 figures emerged from the forest, Apache warriors, armed, wary. Their faces were hard, weathered by life and suspicion. Silas stood slowly, hands empty and visible, his heart pounding against his ribs. He knew he was seconds from death if he made one wrong move. Nakoa spoke in her language. Her words were sharp, full of force. The warrior in command responded in a tone that sounded more like a threat than a conversation. The other 2 moved to surround them. Silas didn't understand the words, but he understood the tone. Danger. The air grew thick, as if the desert itself were holding its breath. The 3 Apache warriors advanced slowly, their shadows lengthening in the midday sun. Nakoa stepped forward, positioning herself between them and Silas. Her voice was steady, but carried something he hadn't heard before. Fear. The lead warrior, a man with a weathered face and implacable gaze, shouted something in Apache. Silas didn't understand the words, but the fury in them was enough to freeze his blood. Nakoa answered in the same tone, quick, tense. The warrior frowned, looked at Silas, then back at her, and shouted again. The other 2 had already circled the porch. Silas slowly raised his hands. He didn't want to provoke anything, but every fiber of his body told him this could end badly. Nakoa turned her face slightly, met his eyes, and said quietly, "Don't move, no matter what happens." He nodded, though he didn't fully understand what was happening. The warrior took another step, aiming his bow at them. Nakoa, with a barely perceptible tremor in her voice, said something that made them pause for a second. The silence was absolute. Only the creak of leather, the wind moving the dust, and Silas's racing heartbeat could be heard. Then the leader spoke again. A single word. Nakoa lowered her head. Her shoulders tensed, and he knew, without understanding the language, that it was a command. She looked at him one last time, and in that gaze were 1,000 unspoken things. Sadness, guilt, something like desire, and above all, a farewell. Then she turned and walked toward her people. Silas wanted to stop her, open his mouth, do something, but instinct held him back. He knew that any word could be the spark that ignited tragedy. The 3 warriors led her away into the trees, and when her figure disappeared, silence returned to cover the ranch like a shroud of dust and loneliness. That night Silas didn't sleep. He paced the cabin, lamp lit, rifle on the table. The echo of that last glance haunted him without rest. Why did she come back? Why take the risk just to look at him one more time? When dawn finally tinged the horizon orange, he already knew something inside him had changed. The silence that had once felt comfortable was now unbearable. Every corner of the ranch smelled of absence. 2 days passed with no sign of her. Until the 3rd night, when the moon was high, a stone hit his window. Silas shot up, heart pounding. He grabbed the rifle, approached the glass, and pulled back the curtain, and there she was. Nakoa standing in the yard, breathing hard, a bruise on her cheekbone, her eyes urgent. She gestured toward the house. He ran down, opened the door, and she entered without a word. Her chest rose and fell rapidly. "They're coming," she said, her voice rough. "They're not far." "Who?" he asked, still trying to understand. "My people, my brother." Her voice was bitter. They want to force me to marry the man they chose for me. I refused, and this is what I got." She touched the bruise with her fingers, showing no pain. In the distance, shouts echoed. It was them. Silas didn't hesitate. "This way," he said, guiding her toward the kitchen. He lifted the rug and opened a trapdoor leading to the cellar, a small, dark space filled with provisions. Nakoa looked at him, hesitant. Their eyes met, and in that instant the distrust vanished. She nodded and climbed down. Silas followed, closing the trapdoor above them. Darkness enveloped them completely. Only their agitated breathing could be heard. Above, the warriors' boots pounded on the wooden floor. They searched the house. The sound of furniture being dragged, glass breaking, shouts. In the cellar's silence, Nakoa gripped Silas's hand tightly, so tightly it almost hurt. Her other hand trembled against his chest, feeling his racing heart. Silas closed his eyes, trying to make no sound, as dust sifted down from the ceiling. And so they remained, motionless, breathing the same air, sharing the same fear. Death walked just above them. The cellar was small, barely a space beneath the kitchen, with dense air smelling of old wood and preserves. Silas could hear the footsteps above, the thud of boots, the sound of things being thrown. The warriors were searching every corner, and both their hearts seemed to beat in the same rhythm. Nakoa breathed fast, but not from fear. It was the instinct of someone who knows every noise could cost her life. Her hand still gripped Silas's, and he felt the trembling of her fingers mix with his. In the darkness, his chest brushed her shoulder, and that minimal closeness ignited something impossible to extinguish. "They'll search the whole house," she whispered, her warm breath touching his neck. "If they find us here, there'll be no way out." Silas nodded silently. The footsteps drew closer. The sound of a chair scraping, the creak of the floor. Someone was right above them. Nakoa held her breath, her body tensed against his, pressed completely against him. The silence was so deep he could hear her heartbeat pounding against his chest. Seconds later, the footsteps moved away. Voices grew more distant, then doors slammed. The danger was still there, but the moment stood still. Silas didn't know if it was from fear or something else, but his body refused to pull away. Nakoa's breath brushed his skin. Their fingers remained intertwined, and in the darkness there was no room for lies. She spoke in a whisper barely audible. "What you said before about never having been with a woman." He swallowed, his face burning even though he couldn't see her. "I don't think this is the best time to talk about that," he tried to say, nervous. "There might not be another time," she whispered, turning her face toward him. Silas felt her breath mingle with his. Every word was a touch, an electric pulse rising up his spine. "They won't stop looking for me," Nakoa said. "If they find me with you, they'll kill us both." "Then why did you come?" he asked, not understanding. Her answer was silence, then action. Her lips found his. The kiss came like lightning, shattering all logic, all distance, all caution. In that instant, there was no danger, no boots above, no outside world. Only the heat of her body, the contained desperation, and that taste of smoke and earth that left him breathless. Nakoa pulled back a few centimeters, breathing hard. "Because in 6 months of pain, rage, and loneliness," she whispered, "you're the only thing that's made me feel alive again." Silas looked at her in the dim light, his mind clouded by emotions he couldn't name. "I don't know what I'm doing," he admitted. "Neither do I," she answered with a barely perceptible smile. "But I know I can't go back. And I can't stop thinking about you." Above, silence finally settled. The warriors had gone, but they didn't move. In that narrow, dark space between dust and fear, something changed forever. The danger was still outside, but inside the fire was already lit. The silence grew dense, almost palpable. Nakoa remained pressed against Silas, her breathing still rapid, her heart pounding. Above, the footsteps faded, and for the first time in hours, the house was still. She rested her forehead against his chest, eyes closed. Her hand was still intertwined with his, but no longer from fear, from something deeper, something neither could explain. Silas took a deep breath, trying to make sense of what he felt. Fear mixed with a new warmth, an electric current running through him completely. He could smell the damp leather of her clothes, the sage scent of her hair, the salt of her skin. In the darkness, his voice was barely a whisper. "Nakoa." She lifted her head, and though he couldn't fully see her, he felt her eyes fixed on him. "If they find us," she said with a calm that unsettled him, "there won't be any more words, only silence." Silas nodded, but his mind was no longer on the warriors, it was on her. On the way her voice cracked with each word, on the way her breath trembled against his neck. "You don't have to stay," he murmured. "I know, but I don't want to leave." There was a long, deep silence. And then without another word, she kissed him again. This time was different. No urgency, no fear, just a quiet, contained desire that slowly made its way through like a flame finding oxygen for the first time. Nakoa's lips trembled against his, and Silas responded without thinking, with the awkwardness of one who has never loved, but with the sincerity of one who feels he can for the first time. His hands moved to her face, then to her neck, and she followed, drawing closer. Their bodies barely touched, but it was enough to erase the line between fear and need. When they pulled apart, both were breathing hard. She rested her forehead against his, eyes closed, voice trembling. 6 months ago I buried my husband," she said. "I thought I'd buried desire and hope too." Silas didn't know what to say. He only listened. "My people believe I should marry his brother, continue his lineage, but I can't. I don't want to live without choosing." The silence returned, heavier than before. Only their interrupted breathing, their skin brushing in the dim light. "And you," she said with a gentleness that almost hurt, "you're the only thing that's made me remember I can still feel." Silas looked at her, his heart overflowing. "I don't know if I'm what you need." Nakoa smiled faintly. "I don't know either, but right now you're what I want." Above, the wind battered the house, rattling the windows, but in the cellar, the world stopped. Two broken souls meeting in the midst of danger, breathing the same air, sharing the same certainty, that though dawn might bring death or exile, that night had bound them together forever. Dawn found them still in the cellar, silent, listening to the wind blow through the cracks in the ceiling. When they finally climbed out, the house was a wreck. Furniture overturned, glass shattered, flowers scattered across the floor, tracks of dry boots stamped into the wood. But they were alive. And in that corner of the frontier, that was already a miracle. Nakoa stood, surveying the damage. Her face was stone, but her eyes said something else. Pain, weariness, a sadness so deep Silas couldn't bear to see it without doing something. "I can help you clean up," he said. She nodded without looking at him. They knelt together in silence, gathering pieces of a broken lamp, remnants of what the warriors had left behind. At first, neither spoke. Only the sound of glass falling into a bucket and the crackle of the fire Silas lit to warm the place. But as the morning wore on, the silence began to transform from tense to comfortable. By midday, Nakoa had repaired a door, cut branches to reinforce the fence, and cooked without asking permission. Silas couldn't help watching her. Every movement she made was firm, calculated. She moved with the grace of someone who had survived more than one lifetime. When he saw her draw water from the well, the rope firm in her hands, he thought he had never seen so much strength contained in one body, and at the same time so much calm. As evening fell, the sun bathing everything in golden tones, Nakoa approached with a blanket over her shoulders. "Your house is strong," she said, "but your fences are. If they come back, they'll get in easily." Silas smiled faintly. "So you'll stay to help me?" She looked at him for a long time. The fire of the sunset reflected in her dark eyes. "Just a few days," she said, but they both knew it was a lie. And when they sat together on the porch, shoulder to shoulder, hands full of earth and bodies exhausted, something in the air had already changed. For the next 3 days, Nakoa worked alongside him. They repaired fences, fed the horses, cleaned the shed. They didn't need many words. They understood each other with gestures, with looks. The first time their hands brushed while carrying a beam, they both froze, just a second, but enough to feel that invisible current binding them. "Sorry," he said, looking down. "Don't apologize for touching me," she answered, her tone firm, almost defiant. "Unless you don't want to." Silas looked up, surprised. "That's not true," he murmured. "I just don't know how to want someone like this." Nakoa watched him, her expression softening. "I'm afraid too," she confessed. "6 months ago, I lost the man I loved, and I swore I wouldn't let anyone close again. But you remind me what it feels like to live." The air between them grew heavy. Silas took a step toward her, barely, like someone afraid to break a spell. "Then stay," he said. Nakoa lowered her gaze, hesitant, but didn't step back. "I don't know if I can," she whispered. "Then try," he answered. Together. For the first time since they met, Nakoa truly smiled. And that smile, faint and brief, was worth more than any words. The sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky red. Crickets began to sing, and the ranch, once only loneliness and dust, began to feel like home. That night, as Silas blew out the lamp, he heard her moving in the next room, and for the first time the silence didn't hurt. Dawn brought calm, a new calm, as if the ranch had woken up different. For years, the sound of wind and animals had been Silas's only company. But now, opening his eyes, he heard soft footsteps, the scrape of a bucket, the crackle of fire. Nakoa was there. She had already gone outside. She wore one of Silas's shirts, sleeves rolled to her elbows, her dark hair tangled by the wind across her back. She was feeding the horses, speaking to them in a low voice with a patience he had never seen. The scene stopped him cold. For an instant, the ranch, that place of only silence and dust, felt like home. Throughout the day, they worked side by side. She fixed fences with precision, showing him how to tighten the wires more efficiently. Silas watched her, trying not to be distracted by the shine of her skin in the sun or the way her muscles tensed when she pulled the rope. At noon, they sat in the shade of an oak tree, shared bread, water, and silence. A different silence, not uncomfortable, but filled with a peace neither had felt in years. Nakoa broke the moment. "My husband taught me to read the wind," she said, looking at the horizon. "You know how to listen, it warns you when something's coming." Silas watched her, trying to understand. "What does the wind tell you today?" She smiled faintly. "That I'm not safe yet." The sun descended slowly, and as the last rays filtered through the trees, Silas felt an impulse he couldn't contain. "Nakoa," he murmured, "you don't have to keep running. You can stay here." She looked at him for a long time, her eyes shining with something between doubt and hope. "If I stay, I'll put your life in danger." "You already did," he answered with a half smile, "but I don't regret it." Nakoa let out a short, genuine laugh that echoed in the air like a miracle. Silas watched her in silence. It was the first time he'd heard her laugh. That night, as the fire crackled in the hearth, she approached with silent steps. "I can't sleep," she said. Silas looked up from the notebook he was writing in. "Memories," she answered, lowering her voice, "of what's to come. My brother doesn't forgive. If he doesn't find me soon, he'll come back with more men." He was silent for a moment. Then we have to be ready. She stood still, watching him. You don't understand. They're not just trying to take me back. If they find out I've been with you, they'll think I've disgraced them. They'll come to kill us. Silas stood, his gaze firm. I don't care about dying anymore, he said. What I'd care about more is doing nothing. Nakoa looked at him, surprise and sadness mingling on her face. You're a fool, she whispered, but a brave one. He smiled. I don't know if that's a compliment. It is, she said, taking a step closer. Because only a brave man chooses to stay when he has everything to lose. The silence wrapped around them again, their breaths intertwined in the half-light, and when she raised her hand to touch his face, Silas didn't move. The caress was slow, careful, as if both knew dawn could steal away what they'd found. That night they didn't sleep. Not because there was danger, but because for the first time there was something worth staying awake for. The sun rose slowly that morning, as if hesitating to shine on what was to come. Silas was already awake when he heard footsteps in the yard. Nakoa was there, kneeling by the youngest horse, tending a wound on its leg. The air smelled of dust and fresh coffee. For a moment everything seemed normal, peaceful, until she stopped, lifting her head toward the horizon. Smoke, she whispered. Silas narrowed his eyes. In the distance, a thin gray line rose in the sky. It wasn't from a campfire, it was torches. Silence fell like lead. Nakoa stood, her expression hardening. They brought more men. They're not just looking for me anymore. They're coming to take me by force. Silas felt fear crawl up his throat, but he didn't step back. How many? Too many, she answered. My brother leads them. They won't leave without me. The ranch filled with a strange, heavy air, as if the wind itself sensed the coming tragedy. Silas picked up his rifle and leaned it against the wall. Nakoa looked at him sternly. You can't face them. If you stand in their way, they'll kill you without hesitation. He took a deep breath. Then I'll die knowing I tried to do what's right. She watched him in silence, her eyes glistening. The sound of approaching horses broke the moment. The ground trembled beneath their hooves. 7 warriors emerged from the forest, their faces lit by torch fire. The leader, the same one who'd stood before his house days before, dismounted and advanced with a firm step. His eyes, dark as night, settled on Nakoa, then on Silas. He spoke in Apache, his voice strong and harsh. Nakoa answered in Apache with a firmness that froze the blood. The other warriors fanned out in a semicircle, surrounding the porch. Silas clenched his fists, his throat dry. What's he saying? He asked quietly. He says I've dishonored my family, she answered without looking at him. That I must return now or I'll be declared dead forever. If I don't go willingly, they'll burn this house with you inside. Silas's heart pounded so hard he could hear it. The warrior spoke again, repeating a word Nakoa pronounced with bitterness. My brother awaits me. He believes he has the right to claim me as his wife. The silence became unbearable. Silas looked at the 7 men before him. He had no chance of winning. But when he opened his mouth, another voice spoke for him. No, just one word, but enough to freeze the air. The warriors tensed, hands on their weapons. Nakoa turned to him, surprise on her face. Silas, I said no, he repeated, firm. She stays because she wants to, not because I force her, not because you command it, because she chose it. The Apache chief frowned, muttering something that sounded like an insult. Nakoa translated quietly. He says a single white man can't stand against 7 warriors, that your death will mean nothing. Silas took a deep breath, not looking away from the leader. Maybe, he said, but if dying means she can live free, then I'll die, because that's what a decent man does. The wind blew through the trees, lifting dust. Nakoa raised a hand to her face, stifling a sob. The Apache chief stood watching him in silence. When he spoke again, his tone had changed, slower, almost curious. He wants to know, Nakoa said, why you would die for a woman who isn't yours. Silas didn't hesitate. Tell him she is. She chose me, and I chose her. For a moment no one spoke. The torch fires crackled, horses snorted, and the entire desert seemed to wait for an answer. The air burned, torches crackled, sending sparks floating like fireflies. The warriors didn't move, neither did Silas. Only Nakoa, standing between them, breathed with the intensity of someone about to decide her fate. The Apache chief looked at him with contempt, but also with something Silas couldn't recognize. Admiration, perhaps. He spoke again, his voice grave, cutting. Nakoa listened to every word, her face hardening like stone. He says, she translated, her voice trembling, that if I decide to stay with you, I'll be dead to my people. They won't speak my name again. My family will mourn me as a ghost. Silas felt a knot in his throat. He wanted to tell her not to do it. Not to sacrifice everything for him, but he couldn't because he knew that if he spoke, he'd be denying her. Nakoa didn't need permission to choose. The Apache chief raised his voice. His men answered with a murmur of approval. Silas stepped forward, but Nakoa stopped him with a gesture. She looked him straight in the eyes. In those seconds, there was more truth than in all the words they'd shared. She took a deep breath, turned back to the chief, and said something in her language with a clear, firm voice without a trace of doubt. The warrior stood silent, surprised. Then he answered furiously, raising his arm, but she didn't move. She spoke again, louder, almost shouting. The other warriors exchanged glances. Tension stretched like a taut thread. The leader spat on the ground, threw out one last sharp phrase, and turned his back. One by one, the others followed. The torches moved away among the trees, disappearing into the forest's darkness. Only the sound of wind remained. Nakoa didn't move, her hands trembled. Silas looked at her, not daring to approach. What did you say? He asked finally in a whisper. She looked at him, and in her eyes was something new, calm. I told them I choose to stay with you, that I'd rather die free than live as a shadow. Silas took a step toward her. Then they've exiled you. Yes, she answered, her voice barely audible. People, I'm already dead. Silence stretched between them, dense, almost sacred. Nakoa took a deep breath, and only then did her shoulders relax. For the first time since he'd met her, Silas saw her eyes fill with tears. He raised a hand hesitantly and wiped them with his thumb. You didn't have to do this. Yes, I did, she whispered, because I don't want to keep running, because when I'm with you I feel like I have a name again. Silas swallowed, trying to speak. You've lost your family. Your tribe, your life. Nakoa shook her head. I've gained everything. She took another step closer, so close the air between them became one. Don't let me regret this, she said. Silas looked at her without looking away. Never. And then she kissed him, not with desperation, but with certainty, with the weight of an irrevocable decision. The torch fires faded in the distance, and in the middle of the vast desert night, two souls who owed nothing to the world finally found each other. The torches vanished on the horizon, and the wind brought a new silence, dense, almost sacred. Nakoa stood still, watching the point where her people had disappeared among the trees. Her shoulders still trembled, not from fear, but from the weight of what she'd just done. Silas approached slowly, afraid to break the air around them. You didn't have to do that, he said quietly. She looked at him with moist eyes, her breath unsteady. Yes, Silas, I did. For years, I lived following others' decisions. Today, for the first time, I made my own. The wind stirred the dust around them, making the lamplight flicker. Silas took another step until he stood before her. He touched her with the gentleness of one afraid to wake from a dream. His fingers traced the line of her face, and Nakoa closed her eyes, letting a tear slide down her cheek. You could have died, he whispered. I could have died many ways before, she answered. From fear, from silence, from obedience, but dying knowing I chose, that is living. Silas swallowed, and now, she said, her voice trembling, I just want to stop fighting, I just want to feel something real. He looked at her with a tenderness he'd never felt for anyone. Then stay with me, he said, almost voiceless. Nakoa stepped closer, so near he could hear her heartbeat. Take me inside, she whispered. The world seemed to stop, the creak of boards beneath their feet, the wind beating at the window, the trembling of their hands. Barely across the threshold, she was already kissing him. The kiss was slow at first, full of doubt, of gratitude, of everything neither could say. Nakoa's hands rose to his neck. Silas's hands traced her back. The air turned to fire. Time dissolved.